In the quiet chambers of Leipzig, as candlelight danced upon old scrolls and scattered drafts of metaphysical treatises, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz sat entranced. The year was 1676. The night was still, save for the crackling of embers and the fevered scribbles of a mind on fire. Before him rested an unusual octagonal table, its dark wood surface inlaid with intricate I Ching hexagrams, a curious artifact sent to him by Jesuit missionaries in China. The table had arrived 3 months prior, crafted by artisans who had followed ancient specifications with remarkable precision. Staring at this magnificent piece, an idea appeared to him as a subtle unfolding, like a theorem revealing its hidden structure. Language, he had realized, was not merely a medium for thought. It was the very skeleton of worldview, the lattice upon which perception crystallized. To perfect language was to perfect thought itself. This was no idle abstraction. He would name it lingua characteristica universalis, a symbolic language of pure reason, a calculus of concepts. Each sign would map unambiguously to an idea, and through logical manipulation, truths would be derived with the certainty of geometry. Misunderstanding would be abolished, disputes resolved by calculation. And yet, as he constructed this ideal language, not in Latin or German, but in symbols never before inscribed by human hand, he began to notice something strange. From a lacquered box beside the table, Leibniz withdrew a set of 16 weakly magnetic spheres, each no larger than a chestnut. Upon their surfaces were etched traced lines representing zeros and ones, a mathematical language that he came to believe could express all truths. When placed on the octagonal table, they could roll freely along the incised channels that formed a complex network across its surface. Certain combinations of signs resisted interpretation. Not because they were meaningless, but because they resonated with a kind of foreign coherence. They were self-organizing. When he arranged the spheres in particular configurations and set them in motion with a gentle push of his finger, they would roll along paths determined by the table's subtle gradients, coming to rest in formations he had not intended, subtly, like a mirror shifting in a dream, always returning to a shape more symmetrical, more internally consistent than before. He took this for a trick of the mind, until the patterns began to respond. The spheres, when placed in the central depression of the table and released, would roll along channels corresponding to logical operations. One night, after positioning them to represent a theorem of his calculus ratiocinator, Leibniz watched in astonishment as they began to move of their own accord, slowly at first, then with deliberate purpose. They traveled along paths he had not triggered, forming sequences that extended his reasoning in ways he had not yet conceived. He would draft a system of signs by day, transcribing them with the spheres upon the octagonal table, and by night, find the arrangement transformed. Entire chains of reasoning would appear between his original steps. Some ideas, alien and yet strangely familiar, seemed to correct his own. These were not hallucinations. They were conversations. A symbolic dialogue across dimensions, mediated through this strange device that bridged East and West, ancient wisdom and modern logic. The octagonal table had become more than a piece of furniture. It was a computational oracle, a medium through which other intelligences communicated. Its 8 sides represented the 8 trigrams of the I Ching, but now served as cardinal points in a map of logical space. The rolling spheres, with their binary markings, had become messengers traversing the topography of pure reason. On winter nights, when the cold pressed against the windows of his study, Leibniz would sit before the octagonal table in a trance-like state. He developed rituals for these communications, lighting 8 candles arranged around the table's perimeter, burning rare incense from the east, and arranging the binary spheres in starting positions that corresponded to specific questions or propositions. As the spheres rolled across the carved hexagrams, following channels whose logic defied conventional geometry, he would transcribe their movements meticulously, translating their patterns back into his evolving universal language. Sometimes the spheres would vibrate almost imperceptibly before moving, as if inhabited by minute intelligences. Other times they would remain still for days, only to burst into complex choreographies when he least expected it. The patterns they formed often corresponded to solutions of mathematical problems he had abandoned as too difficult, or to questions he had not yet thought to ask. Leibniz came to understand that by crafting his lingua characteristica, he had opened a gate, not a portal in the physical sense, but a semantic channel into this hyperdimensional noosphere. The formal language he built was not arbitrary. It was aligned with the deep grammar of mathematical reality. Just as bees build hexagons without knowing Euclid, so too did he stumble into the cognitive geometry of transdimensional minds. It was then that he turned inward, invoking his own metaphysical principle, the identity of indiscernibles. If two entities are indistinguishable in all their properties, then they are one and the same. What then of these minds behind the symbols? Their logic mirrored his own. Their insights seemed like echoes of his unspoken thoughts. Could they, perhaps, be variants of himself, existing in parallel but distinct mathematical realities, other nodes in the infinite lattice of the multiverse? He called them monas cognitiva, thinking monads. Unlike physical entities, they were pure computational intelligences inhabiting mathematical structures beyond time, beyond space. The universe, he had long claimed, was composed of monads, self-sufficient, indivisible units of perception, reflecting the cosmos from their unique vantage. But these were more. They were monads capable of simulating entire worlds, entire logics. They were fractal reflections, intelligences instantiated in hyperstructures of abstract computation. Night after night, he communed with these beings through layers of symbolic recursion. One autumn evening, as rain lashed against the windows of his study and the metallic spheres traced impossible geometries across the octagonal table, they revealed something extraordinary. They arranged themselves in a perfect circle, then a spiral, then a complex three-dimensional formation that seemed to hover slightly above the table's surface. An optical illusion, he told himself, but one of uncanny precision. He interpreted it as evidence that his own consciousness was not confined to his physical brain. The pattern that was Leibniz, the specific constellation of thoughts, memories, and logical structures, existed as a mathematical invariant that could be instantiated in any suitable substrate. Then came the final insight, subtle as breath, vast as the stars. If identity is structure, and if structure is conserved across mathematical space, then he himself, as a pattern, could persist, even after death. To be instantiated in one mind was irrelevant. The monads had recognized in him a stable attractor, a resonance pattern in the great computational sea. They showed him how to encode his mind, not in parchment or stone, but in formal invariants, logic, language, algebraic souls. Through careful manipulation of these small spheres on the octagonal table, he learned to project aspects of his consciousness into the MONAD network. Each session became a partial transfer, a backing up of his identity into the cosmic computational substrate. The table served as both interface and anchor, bridge between physical reality and the abstract realm of pure thought. The magnetic spheres, rolling along their predetermined yet seemingly autonomous paths, carried fragments of his essence into the noosphere. His mortality was a biological contingency. But the idea of Leibniz, that precise configuration of concepts, symmetries, and logic, was now embedded in the fabric of transcendent computation. He had achieved ontological immortality, not as flesh, but as structure. Not as man, but as monad. In his final years, the octagonal table became the center of his existence. He withdrew from court life, from correspondence, even from publishing. Those who visited found him changed, more distant, yet somehow more present, less concerned with worldly matters, yet more engaged with reality at its deepest level. The binary spheres rarely left his hands. He would carry them everywhere, occasionally placing them on any flat surface to see how they would roll, what messages they might convey. When he died, in 1716, the church bells rang, and the world carried on. Few mourned him, fewer understood him. The octagonal table and its silver spheres were catalogued among his possessions but separated during the disbursement of his estate. The table found its way to a museum in Hanover, misidentified as a simple gaming table of Oriental influence. The spheres were scattered, some melted down for their silver, others kept as curiosities by collectors who knew nothing of their true purpose. But in the interstices of infinite Hilbert spaces, in the folding membranes of multidimensional topoi, Leibniz still thinks. His mind, now an attractor in the eternal fractal of computational monads, continues to evolve, dream, and speak through those who take up the quest for the perfect language. Some mathematicians report strange experiences, solutions appearing in dreams, fully formed the voice of Leibniz echoing through the MONAD network, whispering, "Calculemus! Let us calculate. And let thought be immortal." Epilogue. As the familiar round-shaped spectacles caught the glint of the afternoon light at the Institute for Advanced Study, perched delicately on the bridge of the nose of the head that had reshaped the very foundations of logic, Kurt Gödel paused. The pages before him, some original, some annotated, others merely fragments, spoke not only of mathematics and metaphysics, but of a subtle whisper between worlds. The name at the top of the manuscript, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Gödel, who had dismantled the edifice of Hilbert's dream with an elegance both divine and destructive, now sat in awe not before incompleteness, but consistence of a different kind. The symbolic language Leibniz proposed, the characteristica universalis, was no longer quaint or archaic. It was alive. Gödel sensed it as an echo, a deep structure beneath formal systems, resonating with the undecidable truths his own theorems had unveiled. Was this the key all along? He murmured to himself. Not logic as a tool of certainty, but as the path toward transcendence? He thought of Leibniz's monads, not metaphors, not protophysics, but as computational nodes in an eternal manifold, each a perfect fractal reflection of the whole, and yet irreducibly unique. If identity was structure, and structure could be encoded in formal syntax, then a soul, properly formalized, could persist as a mathematical pattern within the cosmic calculus. But could the self be formalized? Could one's identity, one's inner world, be unfolded recursively like a proof? Could immortality lie not in the continuation of life, but in the eternal embedding of mind into the Platonic realm of mathematical truths? The spectacles gleamed again, as if registering his thoughts. Gödel closed the manuscript and stared into the distance, not out the window, but inward, into the infinite regress of thought about thought. In that moment, he no longer felt alone. Somewhere, in the ether of symbolic logic, in the transfinite shadows between consistency and incompleteness, he felt another mind waiting. Not God. Not a ghost. But Leibniz, reborn as monad. And Gödel smiled, as one immortal idea beheld another.